Welcome back to the deep dive. And this week we're taking a deep dive into something that you all have brought to us, .NET Aspire and microservices development.
Absolutely.
So we have a whole bunch of stuff that looks really fascinating. And what we're going to try to do today is to cut through some of the marketing jargon
Yeah,
and really try to figure out what this is, what problem it solves for us as developers, what are the key takeaways, what are the aha moments, and really get under the hood of it.
absolutely.
And I know you've had a chance to look through the source material, so
Yeah.
what are some things that have kind of popped out at you initially?
Yeah, well, I mean, first off, it's .NET 8, so
Yeah.
we're moving into some new territory here.
Right.
And I think what's really interesting about .NET Aspire is that it really is a fundamental shift, I think,
Okay.
in how we're going to be looking at building distributed applications within the .NET ecosystem.
Right.
It's not just a set of libraries, it's a complete stack aimed at tackling some of the inherent complexities.
Right. So this idea of a development stack for cloud-native applications, that seems to be like the core thing here, right?
Yes.
And for those of us who have been doing .NET development for a long time, maybe building more traditional applications, what's the shift? What's
Yeah.
the paradigm shift that Aspire is bringing?
I think one of the sources called it a Swiss Army knife, right?
Oh, yeah.
For this domain, I think that
Yeah.
really kind of sums it up nicely.
Okay.
Instead of cobbling together various tools and libraries to handle all these different concerns, right, of a cloud native app,
Yeah.
Aspire aims to provide a more integrated experience.
Okay.
So think about it. You're building an application comprised of many independent services
Right.
that need to communicate, manage their dependencies,
Yeah.
and be monitored effectively in a cloud environment.
Yeah.
Aspire is designed to streamline all of that.
Okay. And another term that keeps coming up, and I think it's worth sort of defining our terms here, is cloud-agnostic. And this seems to be a key benefit of Aspire. And they're really hammering on this point.
Yeah.
Why is that important in today's development landscape?
Yeah, I think it's hugely important. I mean,
Yeah.
the fact that it's cloud agnostic gives you a significant degree of future proofing, right? And flexibility in your architecture.
Right.
You're not tightly coupled to the specifics of a single cloud provider,
Okay.
whether that's Azure, AWS, or if you're running on-prem local Docker environments for development. Aspire aims for a consistent workflow.
Okay.
And I think this adaptability can be very crucial for organizations that either want to avoid vendor lock-in or need to operate across multiple cloud environments.
Yeah, right. You want to keep your options open.
Exactly.
Okay. So we keep hearing this term cloud native app, but I think it's important for us to define our terms here and make sure that everybody's on the same page.
Yeah.
So what defines an application as being cloud native?
At its core, a cloud-native app is an application that's been architected to fully leverage the benefits of the cloud computing model, right?
Yeah.
So that translates into applications that are designed for high scalability,
Yeah.
the ability to handle fluctuating loads efficiently,
Right.
resilience, meaning that they can gracefully handle failures.
Okay.
Automation is also key, from infrastructure provisioning to deployments.
Right.
Ultimately, I think it's about building systems that are agile and can evolve rapidly.
Okay. So agility, scalability, resilience.
Exactly.
And a lot of the sources mention some key characteristics of cloud-native applications, things like microservices, right?
Yes?
Breaking down applications into smaller independent services, containers, things like Docker to package applications consistently,
Right.
CI/CD pipelines for automated building and deployment, and then infrastructure as code.
Yep.
So why are these particular patterns and technologies so foundational to this cloud-native approach?
Yeah, well, microservices, for example, they allow for independent scaling and deployment
Okay.
of different parts of your application, right?
Okay.
Whereas containers provide that isolation and consistency across environments.
Okay.
And then, of course, CI/CD automates that whole software delivery process,
Right.
leading to faster and more reliable releases.
Okay.
And then, of course, infrastructure as code, it enables you to manage your cloud resources programmatically.
Right.
So you can kind of make your infrastructure, repeatable and versionable.
Okay.
All of these things contribute to those core tenets that we talked about: scalability, resilience, and agility.
Okay. So it almost makes the older monolithic way of building applications
Yeah.
sound simpler, at least initially.
Yeah.
You build one big application,
Yeah.
you deploy it. But what are some of the limitations of those traditional architectures when you try to deploy them and scale them in the cloud?
Yeah, well, I mean, with monoliths, because everything is so tightly integrated,
Right?
scaling often means scaling the entire application, right?
Okay.
Even if only one small part of it is under heavy load. So that leads to inefficient use of resources.
Right.
Deployments can be much riskier and slower as well because any small
Yep.
change requires redeploying the whole thing.
Right.
And then, of course, a failure in one component can
Yeah.
potentially bring down the entire system.
Right. Cascading failure.
Exactly.
Okay. So the promise of cloud native is very compelling. Faster deployments, auto scaling, zero downtime updates, reduced operational overhead.
Right.
But as one of the articles points out, moving to microservices can also introduce a whole slew of complexities.
Yeah.
So what are some of the real-world challenges that developers run into when they're building and managing these distributed systems,
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
especially without the right tools?
I think the sources do a really good job of hitting on this.
Okay.
I think one of the biggest things is just managing the intricate web of dependencies between numerous independent services.
Right.
It can quickly become overwhelming. And then securing sensitive information, right, like API keys, connection strings across that landscape,
Yeah.
that requires careful consideration.
Right.
And then, of course, service discovery is another hurdle. How do we make sure that services can actually locate and communicate with each other?
Right.
And then even onboarding new team members
Yep.
into this kind of environment
Yeah.
can be a really steep learning curve.
It's like a whole ecosystem that you have to learn about.
Exactly.
Okay. So how does .NET Aspire help to bring some order to that potential chaos?
This is where I think Aspire really starts to shine. It
Okay.
provides solutions across, I think, several of these critical areas that we've talked about.
Okay.
So let's start with orchestration.
Okay.
A lot of the sources emphasize the role of the Athos project as this central orchestrator.
Right.
It's where you define all the services that make up your application, their container configurations, and how they relate to one another. And what's really neat is that it also handles things like service discovery and management of those all-important connection strings, abstracting away much of that manual configuration.
So it's like the brain of the whole distributed application.
Exactly.
Sort of defining and managing the relationships.
Yeah.
Okay.
It provides that unified way to describe your application's topology.
Okay.
And then the next thing is integrations, right?
Yeah.
A lot of the sources talk about these suite of NuGet packages that are tailored specifically for connecting to common cloud infrastructure services.
Uh-huh.
Things like databases, PostgreSQL, MongoDB, SQL Server, caching solutions like Redis, messaging platforms like RabbitMQ or Azure Service Bus.
Okay.
So the key here is that it's really easy to integrate.
Okay.
You can add these capabilities to your services
Yeah.
with just a few lines of code.
That's right.
Very streamlined.
So you don't have to do all the heavy lifting yourself.
Exactly.
It's sort of like giving you these pre-configured connectors. Okay, that's great. So we have this orchestrator, we have the integrations, and I know there's also an emphasis on the tooling.
Yeah.
They're talking about this web-based dashboard that's integrated into Visual Studio.
Yes, absolutely.
So why is that an important part of the Aspire story?
I think the tooling is what really sets it apart.
Okay.
It's designed to provide this consolidated view of your entire application as it's running.
Okay.
So it's not just about setting up your app. It's also about getting that real-time insight into how things are performing.
Okay. And let's take that e-commerce example. You have your eShop. You have your catalog service, your orders, payments, shipping.
Yeah.
How would Aspire simplify the development workflow for building an application like that?
Okay. So with Aspire, you would define each of these services as projects within your solution.
Okay.
And then in your Athos project, you would actually declare the dependencies for each service.
Okay.
So for example, if your catalog service needed a PostgreSQL database and your order service relies on Redis for caching and RabbitMQ for handling order placement, you would specify all of that in the Athos.
Okay.
And when you actually run the application, Aspire would handle ensuring that those underlying services are all up and running,
Okay.
that the individual eShop services can connect to them without you having to manually configure network settings or connection strings for each.
That's great. It's really taking care of all the plumbing for it.
Exactly. It's taking care of all that boilerplate.
Okay, so the Athos is kind of like the configuration file for your whole application, it seems like.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Now, this dashboard that you've mentioned a couple of times,
Yeah.
it seems like they're really emphasizing that as a key part of the developer experience.
Yes.
So what kind of visibility does it give you into your running application?
Well, I think what's really cool about the dashboard is that it's just completely seamlessly integrated into that development workflow. So, from the sources I've read, when you hit F5 in Visual Studio, Aspire not only launches your services and any dependencies they have, often in Docker containers,
Right.
but it also automatically opens this web-based monitoring interface.
Okay.
So you have this unified view into the runtime behavior of your entire distributed app.
Okay, so it's launching your application and then it's giving you this dashboard.
Yes.
And what exactly can you see on this dashboard?
Well, they emphasize several key monitoring features that are all consolidated in one place.
Okay.
So you've got your real-time console logs from all of your constituent services.
Okay.
You've got structured logs,
Okay.
which makes it easier to search and analyze.
Right.
You've got distributed traces,
Okay.
which allow you to follow the path of a single request
Right.
as it flows across multiple services.
Right.
And you've even got live performance metrics like CPU and memory utilization for each service.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
So instead of having to use like separate tools like Grafana, ELK, Jaeger, all these kinds of things,
Right.
it's all built in.
It's all right there,
Okay.
in one place.
Okay. And what's the big advantage of having all of that information in one place?
I think the biggest advantage is that it significantly reduces the complexity for developers.
Okay.
Instead of spending time configuring and context switching between all these different monitoring tools,
Yeah.
they have this centralized real-time view of their app's health and performance.
Right.
And that streamlined observability, I think, can really accelerate debugging, improve issue identification,
Okay.
and ultimately just lead to a much less stressful development experience.
Right. Like you said, it's like a whole ecosystem that you have to be aware of. So if you can see everything in one place,
Right.
that just reduces the mental overhead.
Exactly.
Okay. Now, one thing that is always critical with any application, especially cloud applications, is security.
Yeah.
So how does .NET Aspire handle sensitive information?
Okay, well, this is obviously very important, and the approach that they've taken is very robust.
Okay.
Aspire provides built-in integration with Azure Key Vault.
Okay.
So that allows for secure storage and management of things like encryption keys, API secrets, passwords, certificates, all that stuff
Okay.
in a centralized managed cloud service. So
Yeah.
you don't have to store that stuff in your configuration files or anything like that.
So you're not putting your secrets into plain text. You're using the secure vault
Yes.
provided by Azure.
Right.
Okay. And so how does that integrate with Aspire? Like how easy is it to use?
It seems to be very well integrated.
Okay.
It's designed to be very straightforward for developers to leverage.
Okay.
So they can easily store and retrieve secrets from Azure Key Vault directly through their Aspire applications.
So you don't have to like write a lot of custom code.
No, it's very straightforward.
Okay. And what are the benefits of that approach?
Well, I think the main benefit is that it promotes a much more secure way of handling sensitive data in a cloud environment, right?
Right.
You're leveraging a dedicated secrets management service.
Right.
And it helps developers adhere to security best practices with less manual configuration and risk.
Okay. So really kind of lowering the barrier to entry to doing the right thing.
Exactly.
Okay, great. So let's take a step back. We've talked about a lot of the features. We've talked about some of the problems that it solves. What's the big takeaway? What's the big, so what? For somebody who's building cloud applications, why should they care about .NET Aspire?
Well, I think when you look at it from the big picture, Aspire seems to offer a significant simplification in the entire life cycle of developing cloud-native microservices.
Okay.
The rapid initial setup,
Oh, yeah.
the straightforward integration with essential cloud infrastructure, the integrated observability, the secure handling of secrets,
Yeah.
all of those things contribute to a much more productive and less daunting development experience, right?
Right.
It lowers the barrier to entry for building scalable and resilient cloud apps with .NET.
Okay, so it's really making it easier to build these kinds of applications.
Exactly.
It's reducing that friction.
Yeah.
Okay, so for somebody listening who says, hey, this sounds really cool, I want to learn more, what's a good first step? What would you recommend they do?
I think the best way to really grasp the value proposition is to just try it out.
Okay.
Install the .NET Aspire workload, the project templates.
Okay.
Try building a small, simple distributed application.
Okay.
Play around with defining services in the app host, adding integrations, exploring the capabilities of that dashboard.
Right.
Get your hands dirty and see what it can do.
So it sounds like it's easy to get started.
Yeah, very easy.
Okay. And there's good documentation.
Yes, excellent documentation.
Okay, great. Well, it sounds like .NET Aspire has the potential to really change how .NET developers approach building applications for the cloud. It'll be interesting to see how it evolves.
Absolutely.
As you're listening to this and thinking about your own work, your own projects, think about some of the challenges you're facing.
Yeah.
How are you building cloud applications? Could a more integrated and streamlined toolkit like Aspire be helpful for you? Could it help you overcome some of the hurdles you're facing? Maybe unlock some new possibilities for your applications?
Yeah, it's definitely worth considering.
I think so too. It's
Yeah.
food for thought, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive, and we'll see you next time.